trying to squeeze in a lot of material. So unlike the other talks where I show a lot of videos, this is a lot of slides, which I don't know, fun for some people like videos, but this is more slides because there's so much behind what I wanted to try to squeeze in tonight, because it's the last night of this parent series Zoom, and I was trying to squeeze in kind of the big picture of executive functioning, understanding flexible thinking, and understanding the group plan, which some might think is really a school-based topic, but it really is not, because your family is a group and your family functions together as a group. So the more we think about how to think big picture at home, the more it's going to set our kids up for success in the long run. So we're going to try to do that, but I actually like letting you guys watch videos than just listening to me talk, but unfortunately you guys get to listen to me talk tonight. So I kind of wanted to talk with what is executive functioning and what we're trying to, the goal with our kids of how they are going to become social executors and social functioning beings in the world. And I've talked in a lot of the other nights, those of you who have joined some of the other nights of this talk, around how we're trying to create dynamic thinkers. And that really is the crux of how the world works in a social realm, is creating dynamic thinkers. And I think, you know, there's so much right now that parents are really feeling like, oh my gosh, my kid isn't getting enough social. They're not getting enough social. I actually think that what part of what kids aren't getting right now is that dynamic thought process of how to problem solve different situations, because in your home, everything's kind of safe and everything kind of works. And even if something doesn't work, you know, a sibling compensates or a parent compensates. So what kids are not getting is that moment that they have to kind of, if you look at this list, the moment when they have to inhibit their impulse, or the moment where they have to think about the big picture and think about what they need to do in that particular moment. So if we think about the social executive thinking, we have to think about all different types of what makes up the social interaction between how you look at someone and you imitate their skills, or you go to do something and you have to inhibit your actions, or like we've talked about a lot in the past, you have to problem solve and you have to be mindful of, in that moment, what you need to do and what is working for you in relation to that person, and how you have to adapt your actions. So if we really think about an executive functioning, and it has become such a buzzword recently, and I actually love that it's become more of a buzzword, because I think it is so important. And I love that it's kind of taken over the label of attention. Everyone used to, and still does to some degree, talk about like, oh my gosh, my child has no attention. My child has ADD. They're so distractible. I actually like the term executive functioning so much more, because it's actually, I think, a more positive spin on a child has no attention. So what do you do with that? It's so hard as parents to understand. So my child is a really busy child, or my child gets so distracted. Well, I think executive functioning and the theory of executive function really breaks that down to help us as parents with kids that have short attention spans or can get distracted, how to help them in a positive way, rather than just in the olden days, just say, pay attention, stop getting distracted, come over here, focus. Like everyone talks about, like, your child needs to focus. Well, how does a child focus? How do I focus? We have to understand what that means. And I feel like executive functioning helps us understand what that means. And from a very simple term, it's really about integrating kids' awareness and integrating what is happening in the moment to what is happening in the future, and how they make sense of that. And I know I've talked in other nights about that, really kids that are experiencing social challenges, no matter what their diagnosis is really, they're experiencing a disconnection in the information processing, from how they're taking in meaning of information and how they're making sense of it and the output of that. And a lot of that really has to do with executive functioning and how they're making sense of how they're integrating what is happening around them, and their ability to think about it in the moment, think about how that's going to affect them in the future, and how they either inhibit their impulse or use their abilities to adapt their actions according to that moment. So in previous talks, I've talked a lot about my stair steps of the social development. There's also, in these terms, a development of how you build executive functioning and all the steps that it takes for executive functioning to happen. So you look at kind of the stair steps of this, of how kids develop and grow. And so what we're looking at, and this is kind of like the same as like the tip of the iceberg versus the underlying functionality of things. First, you have to look at all of these steps that lead up to the overt behavior of, oh my gosh, my child is running all over the house and, you know, crashing into walls, and they can't get their shoes on, and we're trying to leave and they must not be listening. But really that's the overt behavior of, my child isn't listening, they can't put their shoes on. But if we really dive under, there's so many of these other areas that we need to look at, and we need to better understand in terms of self-regulation, in terms of their motor planning, in terms of their cognitive ability, and what they are capable of in realm of their own, what is typical development and where their development is. So a child at 2 is going to be capable of very different executive functioning skills than a child at 6. So we're not going to expect the same in terms of their organization, their planning, their thought process, and how much they can inhibit their impulse to run out the door when you say it's time to go to the playground. An 18-month-old, we wouldn't think anything of that. But a 6-year-old, we would want them to stop, think, plan, put their shoes on, and then go outside the door. But in fact, that is very difficult for many 6-year-olds, for many 12-year-olds, if they don't have all of that executive functioning in place, and if they don't have all of those abilities in kind of that linear stair-step approach. So I like this slide, and some of these slides I'm not going to go through totally, but I think it's important to look at when you're thinking about your individual child, of where they are in this realm of development. Do they even understand what a future plan is? And we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Do they understand the thought process of time, and where are they within that? And can they think about the big picture versus the details within it? That's going to help you understand how you need to set them up for success within their planning and their organization. And we'll talk about visuals in a little while. But what I am always about first understanding the underlying, where is the child? Where are they when we talk about like their obstacles and their strengths? Where are they in these terms of development, so that we can build the best system for them at this time, instead of always yelling at them when they go to the door and they don't have their shoes on. Let's think about where they are in terms of their big picture thinking and their big picture planning, and think about how we can backstep that and backpedal and build the visuals in place so that they better understand how to do each of those steps. So I think one of the really most important parts, especially for our littler kids, like 9 and under, is giving them a sense of time, giving them the understanding of what time is and how important time can be, not only just so far as like a clock, but how their sense of time drives their understanding of what's happening. So if we say to a child who has zero sense of time, okay, so today is going to be a really fun day. We're going to do your schoolwork, and then later we're going to go have ice cream. If they have no sense of time of, okay, well, schoolwork takes about 2 hours, and then I know I have to have lunch, and then I'm going to go get ice cream. If they don't know how to break down the day, which so many of our kids don't, then we've just set them up for failure, because all you're going to get from your kid is, when are we going to ice cream? When are we going to ice cream? When are we going to ice cream? Or you say to your child like, oh, later grandma and grandpa are coming over. No one has a sense of what later is. Is later 10 minutes? Is later 3 hours? It's very nebulous. All these abstract words are really hard for our kids to understand. So what we have to build in is really concrete ideas for how for them to understand and make sense of this. So I talk a lot about how we're trying to create gray area thinkers, but we have to build a black and white foundation so that we can create gray area thinkers. So like the concept of later, or even like afternoon, things like that are really hard for our kids to grasp. So we have to come up with what we're going to do to help them grasp that concept of in a little while, later, things like this. I'm going to pass slides and then I'll go back to it. So there's so many ways to help concretely understand what time is. And in schools, a lot of times, and this is Sarah Ward, who is an amazing executive functioning coach for kids and actually adults, has built so many great tools to help kids understand executive functioning. Because essentially what happens with kids with executive functioning challenges, and so many kids do have executive functioning challenges, is they can't kind of make a concrete understanding of how to plan, how to organize, and how to structure their day. So the more we help them as young kids, the more they're going to build upon that and create their own structure and embed their own structure as time goes on. So this little clock is like fun in the sense of like for preschoolers who can't tell time, you create a structure within your time, within it, like if you still have one of these kind of clocks, or you build all different kinds of methods of helping them understand time and how they can structure their time. And like the clock you saw a second ago showed the pictures of what the schedule looks like. In school, it might be a squirrel, a bunny, and a teacher will say, okay, when the big hand gets to the bunny, then nap time is going to be over. So they're not going to say in an hour, because our kids don't understand the concept of an hour yet, but they can watch that big hand go to the bunny, and then they're going to understand, okay, then I know when to get up. A lot of kids in our program, we will use timers, all different types of timers, to help them understand, okay, right now your body is really busy. We're going to flip the timer over, and I want you to use a pinwheel and calm your body down for 1 minute or however much the timer is, so they can start to understand that time is a spatial orientation to help their body get back on track, help their brain stay on track, and help them understand how to keep their sustained attention in track with what they're working on. It's kind of a tangent, but I think it's interesting. There was a study done with middle school kids with known attention issues, and they had a little sensor on, and the sensor would go off intermittently. And it was a study on mindfulness, but it essentially, they knew the timer. First it went off at a set time. So they knew every 5 minutes it would go off. So they were training their brain to be on task at that 5 minutes, because at the 5 minutes you had to write down what you were doing. So then they moved it to an intermittent time period where the sensor would like ding, and they would have to write down what they were doing. What they noticed was the more they gave them the sense of time, that then they could go to a more intermittent sense. They could go to an intermittent sensory, like a ding, and the kids were able to elongate out the amount of time they could sustain their attention, because they had trained their brain to build up that time. And once they understood that in the beginning it was going to ding every 5 minutes, they would keep their brain focused for that 5 minutes, and then it was almost like a reset. Now I'm going to do it for another 5 minutes. Now I'm going to do it for another 5 minutes. And then when it went to intermittent, they didn't have a problem with it, because they had worked their brains to sustain that attention. So for our kids, that's a higher level skill. But for our kids, the more we help them focus in a positive way of sustaining their attention and organizing their brains, the more they're going to understand what focus means and what sustained attention means. So like at school, we will say to kids, okay, I want everyone to really focus and read for 5 minutes. If we said 15 minutes, they would fail and everyone would get distracted, and we would have never taught them what focus and sustained attention means. But if we show them with like a time timer, you're going to focus and do your silent book, look, reading, picture walk for 5 minutes, then we're allowing them to start very small. And if we notice some kids only needs 3 minutes, we give them the time timer for 3 minutes. So we start very small and build up. And that allows kids to understand that they can be in charge of that brain body connection and using time to essentially help with that brain body connection. The other thing we want to really focus on within the day is how to help kids, again, sustain that attention to what their task is and what the focus per se is of that moment. So if we give them a schedule of how their day is broken down, and there's lots of different ways you can create schedules, is it helps them break apart their day. So especially during this like whole pandemic thing, if we just say, okay, today, if we don't really give them a schedule, and I did this so much with my parents at the beginning of this whole time when, you know, the schedule was so nebulous and kids are so used to going to school. And now all of a sudden you have from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. It becomes incredibly anxiety provoking for kids. And I think there's a very large correlation. Well, I know there's a very large correlation between kids that have a decrease in their, well, it's an inverse correlation. When their executive functioning is not working well, they have such an increase in their anxiety, because when you're not feeling organized and you're not understanding how to make sense of your day and how to organize your brain around what you're doing, then you're going to become more anxious because you're going to feel more and more out of control. And the more out of control you feel, the more anxious you feel. So a lot of kids during this time show a lot of anxiety, but is that, and many parents were like, oh my gosh, my child is becoming anxious, and maybe it's because of COVID, maybe it's not. There are many kids that show a lot of signs of anxiety, but 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 times out of 10, it really has to do with their schedule and not feeling control of the schedule. And even for me as an adult, on days when I really hone in on like, I'm going to nail today and I'm going to really get a schedule, those are the days where I feel good about the day. And by the end of the day, I feel like if I've checked off these things, I feel productive about the day. So even as an adult, the more big picture organization we give ourselves, the more productive we feel. That for kids is even more important. So using a schedule like this, or using a schedule like this, is really so important to help them make sense of what's happening in their day. And in a school, there's probably not a school you could walk into, whether it's for kids with special needs or typical kids, that does not have a schedule, because that's what makes school work, is the structure and the embedded understanding of how we're going to stay organized in the day. The other way you really work with that executive functioning aspect of things is not only with your visual organization schedule, but also visually organizing the room so that when you're going to play blocks, or when it's playtime and you've chosen to play blocks, putting other things away so that they can then again work on that sustained attention. There's like the divided attention is dividing other things, miscellaneous things out. Sustained attention is focusing in. So really getting them to sustain that attention to one task rather than getting distracted. That's incredibly hard for so many of our kids. So the more we can help them and scaffold that with them, the more they're going to be able to work on that sustained attention and build it up. As you notice from other nights when I've shown videos, there is like nothing in the room. When I'm playing with kids, when the teachers are teaching a lesson, we, unlike other preschools or kindergartens or first grades, we don't have a lot of stuff in the room. We don't have stuff on the walls, because everything that's on the wall is distracting from what we're trying to get them to hone in on and strengthen in that moment. So if there's like a poster of Harry Potter on the wall, or there's a rainbow on the other side, Some child's going to look at the Harry Potter, and some child's going to look at the poster and try to figure out the color sequence of the rainbow, rather than focusing in on what we're doing at the time. So what I want is, I want to give them as much zone in ability so that they're working on strengthening that attention to the task. So again, it's coming from the schedule, so that gives them the big picture. And then once you zoom in on an activity, then you also want to bring that to light of how you can focus in with that, and be able to help them hone in on that and diminish out the distractions. Another really big area when we're thinking of helping them sustain that attention and work on that executive functioning is really learning, and this was on that first slide of being a social executive, is really teaching kids to learn to inhibit impulses and think before they act. There's like, and I don't think I put a slide in here of it. There's like a great visual that we have, and something we really work on a lot, that is around being able to use a stop thought, which is what we use, which is basically a stop sign that says, stop your body, think with your brain, and then act. So that's for so many kids that easily get distracted, that brains move fast, or their bodies move faster than their brain. What we have to do as parents and as teachers is help them stop, think before they act. So you can do that with just giving them a verbal of, whoa, I think you need a thought stop. Let's stop. What was your plan right now? Think about what were you thinking about, and what was your body doing? And some kids have no concept of how disconnected their body is from their brain. They were thinking that they wanted to go play blocks, but their body rolled right over those blocks and completely destroyed a tower that another child was making. And their intention was amazing, but their body was moving too fast. So we try to get them 4 steps in front of them, rolling over their siblings' castle, and say, whoa, Marin, your body needs a stop thought, and say, what is your plan right now? And she may say, I want to go play blocks. And then, okay, what is your body doing right now? And then she'll be like, my body was running. And so then you want to say, what is your body? If I see Julia's playing blocks, what do I need to do? What do you need to do to get your brain and your body to move and play blocks with Julia? So it's a lot around inhibiting and a lot around the self-regulation. So one of the areas that we really work on with kids, we start with that kind of stop thought, which is really just inhibiting that impulse control, but then working on self-talk. And I was just talking to a parent the other day about how great self-talk is, no matter what age. Oh, I know, it was because her child was older and doing a lot of self-talk of like, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, or whatever. And I was like, that's great. That's your child trying to connect to the brain and the body together. That's what we want to do. We want kids to do that, because essentially, what am I doing all day is talking in my head about like, oh my God, it's 1 o'clock. I haven't made lunch, but I still have to make a PowerPoint. Like, okay, which one am I going to do first? Like, my brain is going 5,000 miles a minute, but I'm just not saying it out loud. But at 3 years old, at 2 years old, everyone says it out loud. Some of our kids hit that developmental mark at a much later stage, but that is okay. So if they're self-talking out loud at 7 years old, great. If they're self-talking out loud at 9 years old, great. They just haven't learned to inhibit that self-talk into their own internal dialogue. But what they're doing in that moment is coming up with strategies to build in that inhibition skill and to build in how they're thinking about what they're doing. So a lot of times you'll see kids in when they're playing, and if they're playing by themselves, they're monologuing a lot of it, and they're, okay, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to whatever, like this little character is going to go bake a cake, and oh no, the cake fell, I'm going to go sweep it up. They're doing all this self-talk while they're playing. That is how they're walking through their play plan in their head, and we'll get, I don't think it's next, but, oh yeah, here it is. So they're doing their play plan in their head around what their idea is with play and how they're monitoring their play. And what we want from that is then, well, a lot of times what I'll do when I have two peers working together is you want them to talk out loud, because that's how they then collaborate their two ideas. When I'm talking about my idea and my friend is talking about their idea, then we're doing that very beginning perspective taking of, here's my idea, here's your idea, and here's how our two ideas are going to go together. So I know play is working with my own kids if they're talking about the play with each other, of like, one has a princess and the other has the king. And if one says, okay, my princess is going to go and I think they are going to pretend that they get hurt. And then the other one says, oh, my king is going to go and take care of the princess who got hurt, or whatever. That's them talking through what they are thinking. So what we do for a lot of times to work on, again, this big picture is actually have kids write out a play plan. And there's a whole theory behind this that some preschools, like Arlington, Lexington, do as their curriculum, which is called Tools of the Mind. We at Fuse embed it a little bit because it has really good elements to it, but it's a really good executive functioning curriculum around creating a play plan and thinking through your play plan. So essentially you're gonna, if you are going to kitchen or whatever, what you're gonna do is say, I'm going to go play at kitchen, and then draw or write what's going to be your plan at the kitchen. And then you can say, I'm going to be the cooker, or I'm going to be the this. And so this is a lot of what we do when we go outside, which you guys can do when you go outside as well. Before you go outside and, you know, you have your 3 kids, you can be like, okay, what is going to be our plan when we get outside? One's going to say they want to do bubbles. One's going to say they want to do chalk. One's going to say this. If it's at a time when you're allowing all 3 kids to do something different, great, everybody has a plan. If your intention is for them to play together, then what you're going to say is, okay, guys, so I hear the plans are chalk, bubbles, and soccer. But my hope is that we can all choose something to play together. And then they're all going to look at you like you have 5 heads, because they all have their different plans. And then what we will do a lot at Fuse is do thought bubbles of 3 stick figures of kids and 3 bubbles. And in those bubbles, you'll have chalk, you'll have actual bubbles, like blow bubbles, and then you'll have the soccer ball, and you could be like, how can we all play together with 3 different plans? And there's essentially 2 options. One is really squishing all those together, and when you start the soccer game by blowing bubbles, and maybe chalk is how you come up with the goals, or you say, okay, we're going to do the chalk idea first, and then the bubbles idea, and then the soccer idea. So you're coming up with what your plan is going to be. And then what's really nice is if you write down a plan like this, then at the end, you can draw a picture of what the plan is going to be tomorrow. So say you were doing kitchen and you did the cooker and the chef, or the cooker and the restaurant person, like someone comes in to order the food. And then maybe at the end, the person got sick, and they got sick from the food, and now they're sick in bed. So you can show your kids how it evolves, and you can say, like at the end of that play, like it's time to go eat lunch, you can say, guys, first you were going to be a cooker and a customer. Now the customer is sick, and now you're the doctor. And so then tomorrow you can look back at the play plan and show them what the plan evolved into, and then say, okay, if we're going to play kitchen again today, what could we do to add to this plan? So you're giving them a little bit of how to make this work for them to evolve the play and evolve into different plays at different times. So what I wanted to, going off of that idea of play plans and what I was talking about everyone has a different plan and we kind of have to work together, I wanted to kind of meld in this idea of how social thinking can work into that. And I know many kids go to schools that have social thinking as has the social thinking curriculum, but really my thought for parents is you don't have to know the social thinking curriculum. Social thinking is inherently social play. And like I was just talking about with the chalk versus bubbles versus soccer, social thinking is perspective taking. And just like I was saying a second ago, you have to think about the perspective of, if I'm going to be a cooker or if I'm going to be a customer, I have to have the very initial steps of what my perspective of that play is versus another person's perspective of that play, and how we're going to work together with that. So social thinking breaks it down in an amazing way, but you don't have to be a master at social thinking per se, the Michelle Garcia winner social thinking curriculum, to be able to meld it into your everyday life in terms of social knowledge and how you can work on helping your kids build that perspective taking, which again connects with the executive functioning, because it's the big picture thinking. And you're building the social thinking is the perspective taking, but you're building and enhancing the executive functioning when you're saying to your child, well, wait, you want to play chalk, but your brother wants to do bubbles. And so think about the big picture right now. If we both go outside, we're going in two different directions. And then you're both going to be pretty bummed that you aren't playing together, because you want to, the goal was that we were going to go out and play together. So executive functioning and social thinking really work together in that you're helping kids understand how their brain organization and inhibiting that impulse allow them to be better social thinkers and better perspective takers. So a lot of times we talk about it as a future plan of like, we're going to go out at school. We talk about, we're going to go out to the playground. Okay, so, child X, what's your idea? When you are thinking about going outside, what's your plan? Same idea as if you're going out with your kids. You want them to have that future idea of how they're going to vision themselves playing outside and how they're going to work together with that play. The same thing of, if it's raining out, you want to think about that future plan of what is my body going to look like when I go outside? What's the future idea of, okay, I see that it's raining outside. Let me think about what I need to do before I go outside. So giving them that big picture of, well, if it's raining or it's snowing, I need to put a jacket on, I need to put rain boots on, and then I can go outside and be the perspective taker and be connected with another child outside. So when we think about how to build social thinkers and what we're doing, we really, and this goes into the social thinking curriculum, what we're trying to help them understand is that I have a thought, you have a thought. And what's most important about that is not that a child knows my thought, because they very well may know my thought, but they're very much going to dismiss my thought because it wasn't as important as their thought. What the important aspect of I have a thought, you have a thought, is getting them to appreciate my thought, seeing that my thought is different than theirs, and seeing that my thought might actually enhance their play and might actually be able to be integrated into what their thoughts are, what their thought is and what they're doing. So first, it's just for our very littlest kids, for your like 3s and 4-year-olds, it's helping them understand that their thought might be different than your thought. So if you say to your 3-year-old, 2-year-old, what are you thinking about having for dessert? And you made cookies or something. And they're going to be like, well, I want to have a cookie. But maybe they know, like, maybe cookies aren't your favorite thing. But in that moment, guaranteed, if you said to your 2 or 3-year-old, what is your thought? Hold on. What is your thought about, what do you think about having for dessert? What they are then going to say is, well, you want a cookie too, because I want a cookie. And so they're not understanding that their thought is different from your thought. And so what you want to build in with them is, you are thinking about having a cookie, but I am actually thinking about having ice cream because I don't really like cookies. And that's in the beginning. What you want to build is that different thought patterns of, I have a thought, you have a thought, and it is totally okay that our thoughts are different. Then you build up from there and talk about how your thought and my thought might be your idea, your thought and my thought might be different, but we can squeeze our ideas together. And that's when we then get into the group plan and thinking about how, and the group plan is at home, it's the family plan. At school, it's the group plan. But every family is a group. 2 people is a group. You, your child is a group. You, your 17 children, and is a larger group. But two people working together is a group because you have 2 different ideas, 2 different perspectives, and we have to work together on how to integrate those in together. So when we think about dessert, first we're going to help them understand that my idea around dessert may be different than your idea around dessert. But what we also then want to help them understand is maybe tonight is going to be a group idea for dessert. So if Marin got all her stars on the chart, she gets to decide what we're having for dinner. So if her idea is everyone's going to have ice cream, then that may be different than your thought, but it's going to be the group plan for tonight. I'm hoping, yeah. So there's so many mantras that we can use to build strategies to understand cognitive flexibility, which is going with a different idea than what your own idea is. And this is like, we use this at school a lot. You can use it with your kids a lot. It's an oh no, oh yes type approach. So my other child, Julia, may really want a cookie, but it's Marin's night because she earned her stars. So then she's going to get to say what the dessert is. And so then Julia needs to use her mantra around the cognitive flexibility and the perspective taking of a group plan. And she needs to use that idea of, oh no, I really wanted cookies. Oh yes, tomorrow night I might fill my jar. So tonight we're going to go with Marin's plan. And tomorrow night I'm going to get to fill my jar, or I'm going to get to pick the dessert. So it's giving them lots of mantras, which mantras are basically like cognitive behavioral strategies in that moment of, I didn't get my idea. I didn't get my plan, my individual plan, which is different from the group plan. My individual plan didn't happen, but the group plan is this. And how am I going to be flexible with this group plan? And that really, those strategies are quite different for every child. It could be that you just need to take a breath and you need to be flexible. And so many kids, it's kind of a joke for kids that go to Fuse. They will go up to their parents a couple months into school and be like, Mommy, you need to be flexible right now. It's raining out. And so they'll get that. We talk so much about flexibility and how you build that in. And so kids start to use that and they start to understand that big picture idea, which goes back to the executive functioning, is flexible ideas. So my big picture was that I wanted to go outside, but oh no, it's raining outside. Now I need to think, well, if I go outside and it's raining, I'm now going to get rained on. So I need to switch my thinking and I need to come up with something fun to do inside. So, oh no, I can't go outside. Oh yes, I love to do art with my friend inside. So getting kids to think in the flexible way and using strategies to come up with what the group plan is and how they can use their strategies around coming up with the group plan. And these are just all kinds of tips of how to become flexible in the group plan. And there's really so many ways to work on flexibility within your home around getting, I mean, we do it at school, but it's the same at home, of have someone be in charge of the table seatings for every night at dinner. So Julia's in charge tomorrow night of who's going to sit where at dinner. And then the next night, Nora's going to be in charge of who's going to sit where. And everyone comes to the table knowing, okay, they're going to brace themselves that Nora gets to be in charge. So, well, at least in my house, that Nora's going to put herself at the head of the table when it's her night to be in charge. So everyone has to be flexible because it's Nora's plan. And then they know in their head, on night 4, it's going to be not my night to come up with the plan. There's so many ways that you can embed this idea of group plan and group thinking and cognitive flexibility within your everyday thinking. So say you go outside 2 times a day and you really want, and I think it's important to work on this flexibility around group plan. So talks amongst your kids and say, okay, the first time we go outside, it's going to be well, I mean, you could do it either way, but it's going to be mommy's idea of what we're going to do. Next time when we go outside, it's going to be your idea of what you want to do. Or you can split up the time when you go outside. Of the first 10 minutes can be mommy's idea. The second 10 minutes can be Julia's idea. But you want to help kids learn that flexibility, because that's going to help them with their friends. They can't rule the whole play on the playground, although it works for kids. And I think a lot of parents mistake bossy kids for being a negative behavior. But in fact, if you really dive into bossy kids, it's their compensation model, because they're missing some of these social foundations. So if you're incredibly bossy, well, it works out really well, because you don't have to read other kids' cues. You don't have to adapt your actions to their actions, because they're all following you. So that kid's actually compensated quite well. But in the end, they haven't actually learned the social tools they need to become reciprocal. Again, everything needs to be a 50-50 play. So they haven't learned to be reciprocal players. They've learned to manage their play by being the leader. What I always say, because in every household, there's a leader child and there's like a child who appeases the leader. It is just as important to teach that child who appeases. We think like, oh, that child is so flexible, they're so great. Well, no, they have to learn to step up and share their ideas. And the leader child needs to learn that they need to acquiesce to the siblings' ideas. So there's so much at home that you can do in an important way of getting kids to come more to the middle and getting them to regulate their actions with another person's actions. So that leaders learn to go into that uncomfortable position of becoming a player in another person's game, and then followers go in that uncomfortable position of advocating for themselves and leading for themselves. And both of those are really important in terms of play, and it helps build, again, that cognitive flexibility and the dynamic thought process. Because what you want to build is, if we think about play, is play evolves. And again, that goes back to the play plan of first it was we were being a cooker and a customer, then play turned into, oh no, now the customer has to go to the doctor. So if kids are really stuck in black and white in their thinking of play, they're not going to be able to cognitively flexibly think about play as evolving. So we have to get them to think flexibly to allow play to evolve. And that's where a lot of kids get stuck when they're playing with their friends in the street, and all of a sudden they come in and they're like, well, I don't get it, we were playing pirate, and then all of a sudden the play turned into whatever, Star Wars, and they totally missed, or they may not have missed it, but they liked the play staying the same. And so we have to get them to appreciate that their idea is step one, different than another child's idea. And that sometimes it's going to be their idea of staying with pirates, and sometimes it's going to evolve into someone else's thought and idea. And as the group evolves, they need to evolve with the group and come up with ways that they can work on how to continue to be a group player in the game and how to continue that play. And last week, when we were talking about how to create regulated play patterns, coming up with roles of, I'm going to be the builder, you're going to be the parts department or the deliverer or cooker customer. That's a really great way to start simple, regulated, collaborative group play. And then it can evolve from there. But the more you structure it in the beginning, the more it evolves. A lot of times, if you just let your kids loose, it becomes much more difficult for them to be able to, especially kids with challenges around cognitive flexibility and group plan. The more you give them structure in the beginning, the more they're going to be able to be able to evolve with that play and think flexibly with the play. So that was kind of a fast track, quick approach to both. I'm trying to get it off of the screen share. What did I just do? That was kind of a quick approach to how to work executive functioning. My little cursor dealings. How to work executive functioning and co-regulation, collaboration, and then working it into group plan and flexible thinking. I'm happy to take questions or clarify something. I know I used a lot of terms, and again, I can send you this PowerPoint if that, because this had a lot of words on it, and I don't usually, as you can now tell, follow the PowerPoint perfectly, but I can send